Today I'm going to make pizza, and we're deviating quite a long way from standard pizza recipes here, on purpose. So I'm only going to apologise once for this right at the start, because this pizza is quite deviant in terms of all of the choices. And it's not that I don't know how to make authentic style pizza, and it's not that I don't appreciate that kind of pizza, but this is a recipe that I've developed and iterated that I really like. So anyway, on we go. The first thing is the crust is going to be a mixture of wholemeal and rye and other flours. There is some white flour in there. So I've got 184 grams of white flour, maybe 183 actually. I'm using my bread sheet, by the way, to calculate the constituents of the dough. Next, I want 125 grams of wholemeal. And again, this is strong wholemeal. So 125 grams of this. 60 grams of rye. I think probably quite an unconventional inclusion for a pizza dough, but it's really tasty. 44 grams of vital wheat gluten. 31 grams of milled golden flaxseed. 25 grams of oat bran. Then about a teaspoon of salt, and there will be some oil to go in there as well just before we mix. This is going to make a kind of tasty, nutty, but still very light and airy wholemeal crust. It's going to have amazing flavours of its own, so it's not just a foil for the things we're going to put on top of the pizza. Right, that's the dry ingredients. My yeast is the kind that needs to be activated, so I'm going to have 50 ml of water, and this will count towards the total liquid content that's going in the bread. Into there we're going to have a teaspoonful of sugar and a teaspoonful of the dried yeast. Little whisk just to combine it, and we just wait for that to froth up. Yeast is just coming up to bloom now, so let's get mixing. So I want about 15 grams of olive oil. A gram over, nobody's going to cry about that. And now 287 grams, or 287 ml of lukewarm water. Plus the 50 ml that obviously has the yeast blooming in it as well. And now we mix. Just to make that easier, I'm just going to use the dough hooks on my hand mixer. Now, of course, you could mix that by hand, but why have a dog and bark yourself? So just mix that really until the dough comes together. No pockets of dry ingredients remaining. Now, lid on. And I would normally prove that in the airing cupboard, the cupboard that's got the hot water cylinder in it, and that would prove in about an hour. But we're going to go out and have a little wander on a beach somewhere. So I'll just leave that at room temperature, and it'll take maybe 2 or 3 hours to prove. So this is West Bay we've come to today. And this is a perfect beach for Eva's favourite pastime. We are actually here at the, notionally the top end of Chesil Beach. You could call this part of Chesil Beach, because there's more or less a continuous strip of beach that comes all the way up here to West Bay. There is a bit of a headland here, but you could argue that this is part of Chesil Beach, and this aggregate here is the finer rocks, the smallest end of the range of pebbles. It's, well, let's have a look at it. So it is very fine gravel, down to almost down to sand, coarse sand. It's a blustery, cold, grey November day. I'm not very sure that we're going to walk in front of those cliffs. I don't know if you can see it. I'll try and hold the camera upright. Some of these cliffs actually overhang and they collapse frequently. The pieces of these cliffs just fall off. It's just soft sandstone. Quite frequently they have big cliff falls here, so I'm not very sure I really want to walk in front of it. We will take a slightly closer look at the cliffs though. So as I say, you're not going to go in front of these bits that really tower over you. I'm not feeling that brave or foolhardy, but we will just have a look at these cliffs, and I think we'll be able to see why these cliffs fall down such a lot. For one thing, the tide does come all the way up here, so at a very high tide, and especially with a storm surge, the water does wash all the way up here. But the rocks that compose these cliffs are quite soft, crumbly, friable. It's on a kind of sandstone. You can see the big crack there, big pieces of this just come off. It's almost just like hardened clay. In fact, that may be what it is. It does feel like it's a little bit more cemented than clay, but yeah, you can just see where the waves have washed in here and carved it all away. And so once it gets undercut, well, there you go. You can see that top part there is clearly overhanging and ready to come down. All right. Fine, we'll do the thing. Where is it? Well, where's your stone? What are you doing with it? Stone with an hole in it. That's a flint nodule, I think. Piece of chert or flint. The hole may be the remnant of some structure. Flints are made up from the minerals from fossilized sponges chiefly, so and that type of organism, and so quite often you find them in a funny shape. There is a lot of this stuff around, which I think is like lime bay agate. It's called lime bay agate. It's a form of chalcedony, and it's got a purplish kind of hue to it. Jenny's looking up at the cliffs, and those up there, the cliffs have been carved by the wind. Obviously the water doesn't go that far up, but you can see the wind has just blown away some of the material, the softer rocks. I mean, some of that actually also could be frost damage, so the water soaks in, freezes and spalls off the softer rock. But yeah, that's been carved away. I remember seeing some formations like this in Spain, near where my mum lives. But actually you can also see there's a vertical crack there. This big chunk of cliff here is going to come down sometime, maybe sometime this winter. And in fact you can see there, and again, another big vertical crack. These pieces just eventually get too undercut and fall down. But that's where the beach comes from. All of this beach, and a lot of Chesil Beach, and the beach sort of down shore from here, is made up from the aggregates that wash out of these cliffs and are eroded, and this erosion is what feeds the beach. But yeah, so this is, well, I wonder how long it would take me to count a fisherman's hand full of that stuff. See if we can find a piece of sea glass. I was expecting that we might find quite a lot here, because obviously, well, for one thing, the sea is churning. Anything that falls in the sea gets churned up and polished smooth quite quickly, but also there's a holiday park here, and this is a popular holiday destination, so the opportunity for glass to find its way into the sea, that's just a smooth stone, but the opportunities for glass to find its way into the sea are perhaps greater here than they might be at other beaches. It's very, very smooth stone, obviously being tumbled around in all this fine gravel has polished the rocks here so that they're a lot smoother than they might be at other beaches where it's a little bit coarser. Oh, Eva, go on then. That's interesting, that's a piece of granite. That must have been transported here, well, unless it's part of a building that's collapsed and fallen into the sea. That must have been transported here by glaciers, because there are no granite outcrops near here. Oh, even. And that's, there we go, it's a piece of chalcedony, possibly lime bay agate. Polycrystalline quartz. In fact, you can see what might be bits of banding there. That could be traces of agate banding there, or might just be the way it's worn. I'm still looking for my piece of sea glass. Eva's still chasing and barking at rocks. So we're nearly at the mouth of the harbour now. This harbour is the mouth also of the river Brit, I think, which is the river that runs through Bridport. But yeah, have not found my piece of sea glass. I shouldn't be too disappointed, because that does indicate that there's not too much refuse on the beach. So let's not be downhearted about that. But we'll keep looking. I think what we might do is walk around the harbour and go on the beaches the other side of the harbour as well, and see how different those are. The beaches couldn't be more different on either side of the harbour. This one, we've got coarse sand, well actually some quite fine sand in places, down to sort of shingle. The other side of the harbour is markedly different. So we'll go and have a look at that in a minute. What do you want? Oh, if I didn't know. Fine. So down alongside these rocks that protect the harbour wall, I found a piece of sea glass. Can you see it? It's not very well worn though. Oh, I don't know. That's okay. Yeah. Only really had the corners knocked off. Okay, dogs on leads around the harbour's edge. Sensible. I always think this building here has a bit of a kind of a Wes Anderson energy to it. So that's the outflow sluice from the River Brit. So we have to take a diversion around here to get around the harbour. This is interesting. I'm fairly sure that last year we walked along here, but this harbour wall is collapsing into the harbour, and they've got scaffolding up with reinforcement, some temporary bags there to reinforce it, but you can see where that's just sagged and is disappearing into the harbour. They're going to have to do something about that. I'm sure we walked along there. So over here on the west side of West Bay, it's a different kind of beach altogether. It's a different kind of beach. Let's get down there and have a look. I did not encourage Eva to get up on the wall. This is just a kind of little child thing, isn't it? I want to walk on the wall, Daddy. So, quite reminiscent of Budleigh Salterton. I don't know if that video has been published yet, but we did a visit to Budleigh Salterton to see the Budleigh Buns. Quite reminiscent of that here, and for good reason. Some of these stones are Budleigh Salterton quartzite, but there are also quite a lot of granitoids here. So that is a granitoid, as indeed is that, but it's a different one. And that, and yet again a different one. Now I don't know whether these were brought here to reinforce the beach or whether these have been transported here naturally. I think we'll have a little search online and see if we can find out what the composition of this beach is and why it's like this. And so there are some very pretty rocks here on the shore, and Eva is itching to get off the lead so you can enjoy the pretty rocks. Okay, choose one, choose a rock. Now the inclusion of all these pretty rocks in this video does mean I'm going to have to render this video at a very high bit rate, which makes it enormous for upload, but hopefully YouTube won't wreck it completely. What you got, Eva? A stone. So that was West Bay. We just had a coffee actually and a bit of cake in West Bay in the Windy Corner Cafe over there. I'm going to head back round now and back for home. Okay, we went out for a couple of hours, come back, dough has doubled in size. So that's ready for the next step. I'm going to be baking my pizza in 2 of these trays. These are big, heavy steel trays. So it's going to be a little bit kind of Detroit style maybe, just because of the way it's going to be configured. The butter, just about the right amount there. Olive oil. About half a teaspoonful of garlic powder and a little pinch of salt. That's going to go in the microwave just for long enough to melt that butter. So that was about 10 seconds. And just so the butter is soft enough to blend in, and I'm working over the top of this tray here so that any spills go straight onto the tray. Quite liberal spreading of this butter and olive oil mix, which is seasoned with garlic and salt, on the bottom of the tray. The fact that these trays are cold means this butter is going to set now, and the olive oil might even go to wax as well. Anyway, something like that, and then the same over this side. And what this is going to do, obviously this will stop the crust from sticking to the pan, but it will also fry the bottom of the crust in garlic butter. I did an experiment with this in a different video a while back, and I added way too much butter and way too much garlic, and it was good, but it didn't quite work. So this is the kind of refined version of that. Yep, that looks about right. So there's maybe a tablespoon and a half of the butter, oil, garlic mix on each of those trays. Now, on a liberally floured work surface, We're just going to work this dough a little bit. So you see we've got a coherent ball of dough there. Floured hands, bit of flour on top. And I will knead this for a little while, but the kneading's just going to be like stretch and fold, like that. Stretch and fold. Just a few of those. It doesn't need a lot. You know, we're not making fluffy dinner rolls here. We're making a pizza base. And actually it wants to be a little bit irregular because that'll make it more interesting. So we just knocked all the gas bubbles out of this that the yeast has produced, but it is going to rise again while we're preparing the toppings. That's as far as that needs to be kneaded. That's as much as that needs. And there's enough dough there for both of those trays. So we'll divide it exactly in half. And we are going to roll this out. Rolling pin might seem a little bit brutal for a pizza dough, but it's what we're going to do. Now, this will fight me to start with, this dough. So we will have to work on this a little bit. Just roll it and hold it. A bit more flour. So roll and hold. And there will be, for a while, this feeling that actually we're not ever going to get to the point where this is rolled out sufficiently large to cover that tray. It's just going to feel like it keeps on springing back, but we just keep going. I'm getting there. Okay, just going to offer that up to the tray and see what we're like. So I want to go a bit longer than that. Okay, and by kind of putting a bit more pressure in on the edges of the rolling pin like that, you can get it to approximate a rectangle. That looks about right. So, roll it up onto the rolling pin, summon the tray, and then roll it back. Might have messed that up a little bit, but that garlic butter will allow me to just move things around a bit if I need to get it into the corner. And so we're looking to push that up a little bit at the corners, just because the sauce it's going to be a bit like a pie. So the sauce and toppings are going to sit on the top here, but they're also going to need a little bit of a crust at the edge just to retain them. So the other one's just the same, you know, second verse, same as the first. So these two bases now are more or less ready. So I'm going to leave these in a warm place now while I get cracking on the toppings and fillings. First things kind of first, the sauce. So I've got some homegrown tomatoes here that I froze earlier in the year. This is a mixture of red and yellow tomatoes, so the sauce won't be that deep coloured, except I am also going to add some tomato puree, a bit of paprika, and for flavour, oregano. While that tomato sauce is coming up to a simmer, one of the other toppings is going to be mushrooms. Look at these fantastic mushrooms. I'm going to use the whole tub. Mushrooms on a pizza, you could cut beautiful mushroom-shaped slices and arrange them neatly on the pizza. I'm not going to do that today because I'm shooting for flavour rather than pretty aesthetics. So these are going to be cut into fairly small pieces, and then we're going to fry these and then simmer them and then fry them again. So over here, a little bit of olive oil. Tomatoes are just simmering away to thaw them out, and the mushrooms are going to go in here. And that's only half of them, but they will cook right down. Right, that's all of those mushrooms in there now. and you can see there's juice coming out of them, and they're starting to simmer in their own juices. I'm going to let that happen. In fact, I'm going to encourage it by adding about half a cup of water. And so these mushrooms will first stew in their own juices and in that water, and they will develop a huge amount of flavour. Then, once all of that water's driven off, they'll start to fry again. Meanwhile, the block of tomato here is nearly thawed out. I'm just going to move that around. And I'm not going to sieve this, I'm just going to blend it actually. So we will end up with all the skins and everything in there, but I don't care. But we're now at the point where I can start adding in the other things. So, half a teaspoonful of oregano, a couple of tablespoons of tomato puree, heaped teaspoonful of paprika. So you might look at these mushrooms and think, oh no, they're boiling. In the immortal words of the Cat in the Hat, this is what they should do, and I knew that they would. Look at that broth that's coming out the mushrooms. You don't necessarily get that if you just fry them directly to crisp. So what's happening here is this stewing process is breaking down all of the cells inside the mushrooms, and all of the goodness is coming out of them. All of the kind of amino acids and flavoury stuff is coming out of the inside of the cells, going into the liquor, and then when we reduce this, all of that will cook back into the mushrooms and they will just taste fantastic. The tomato sauce, yeah, I'm just going to reduce that a little bit. While those mushrooms are sizzling away and the sauce is cooling down, other toppings. For me, I like pizza with a lot of onions on it. Obviously the toppings are where pizza gets personal, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'll slice them fairly thin because these are going on the pizza raw, and the only cooking they're going to get is baking the pizza. And I'm just thinking about the size of my pizza base, and I don't know that that's going to be enough onions to give me adequate coverage. So I think it is going to be 2 onions. One of Jenny's toppings is going to be ham, and I wonder if you can guess what the other one will be. I find these packs of ham trimmings are quite good for pizza toppings. It's a bit hit and miss what you get sometimes, but you get quite a lot for your money. These are big pizzas, so we're going to need a fair old bit of topping to go on them. And there's no point in being ungenerous with the toppings. That looks about right. In addition to my onions, I'm going to have pepperoni on mine. This was the only pepperoni I could get. I don't know how good this is. Now, in addition to ham and mushrooms, one of the other things Jenny likes on her pizza is pineapple. Now, I am well aware of the status of pineapple on pizzas. Not my favourite topping, personally. However, Jenny really likes it. And if you want to tell me that Jenny shouldn't have pineapple on her pizza when she really wants to, I will fight you. These mushrooms have got about another 2 or 3 minutes left of cooking to drive off the rest of that water. Just dry them up a little bit. And I've changed my mind about this sauce. I'm not going to blend that at all. I'm just going to leave it as is. It's got little bits of the tomato skins have rolled up into the little cigar things like they do. Don't really care. Just going to put that on as is. It looks really nice. Right, that's it. Mushrooms are pretty much done now. And the sound is starting to turn from bubbling back into sizzling. So I'm going to turn off the heat now. Let them stand while we assemble the rest of the pizza. Pizza assembly time. Now this dough hasn't risen much, but it has gone all kind of bubbly and lumpy, which means that there'll be some little pockets of air in there, some little bubbles and crusty bits and voids underneath. So sauce on the pizza, and I reckon I'm going to use about 2/3 of the sauce on the base like this, and we'll just spread that out. We don't want too much, we just want a layer that's going to give us flavour. Reserving about 1/3 of the sauce, because this being ever so slightly Detroit style pizza, we're going to put some blobs of sauce on after the cheese. Okay, right, there's the sauce. Now on mine, I'm going to have some black pepper right on top of that sauce. Next, I've got a little bit of pecorino, just a little sprinkling of pecorino on top of this tomato sauce. So this is just a bit like using it as a seasoning. No mushrooms. that whole tub of mushrooms definitely wasn't too many. Right, next, and possibly controversially, cheese, but just cheddar. And it's going to go on top of these mushrooms. There will be some more cheese later, but a layer of cheese on top of the mushrooms. Just a thin one. It's just going to help to bind all the toppings and stop them falling off and slipping off the pizza. And for me, quite a lot of onions. I do like a few onions on my pizza. On Jenny's, the ham goes on next. Plenty of it. And then more cheese. And again, cheddar. I think cheddar's really nice on a pizza, actually. It doesn't pull like mozzarella, but it does taste really cheesy. Now, in case you're thinking this is a huge pizza for Jenny, and it is, we're not going to eat this all in one sitting. We'll cook this and then half of it, at least half of it's going to go in the freezer. Right, also want cheese on mine. And then the pièce de résistance on Jenny's, some pineapple. I nearly forgot. Some little blobs of additional sauce, just here and there on top of the cheese. What will happen here is a different kind of thing will happen to this sauce. So the sauce that's underneath all the cheese will bake onto the crust. This sauce that's on top of the cheese here will have a chance to caramelize and do some different things. That's now going to go into the oven, 200 Celsius for 20 minutes, maybe 25. We'll check it after 20 and see how it looks. Okay, 22.5 minutes have elapsed. That's Jenny's, and that's mine. I'm going to leave these to stand for 5 to 10 minutes because they'll just be way too hot to enjoy at the moment. Just long enough for the trays to be cool enough to handle. And there we go. So underneath the crust is kind of toasty and fried in garlic butter. That's going to be delicious. I'm going to cut this in half, actually, and put half back in the tray just to make it easier to handle. This is Jenny's, and I'm not going to taste it for her, obviously. But this pizza, this kind of method of making pizza, I worked on this quite a lot while Jenny was away dealing with a family emergency last year. And so I would just make an enormous big batch of this pizza and freeze some, eat some several days running, cold pizza for breakfast, all those kind of things. But yeah, it just made sense to, if I was going to knuckle down and bake pizza, to make a batch of it that would go for several days. And if we just have a look underneath, yeah, the crust is bready and doughy, but not soggy. Little taste of this on camera, just so I can tell you what it's like. So the crust, despite it being a kind of wholemeal and rye and all of those other things, it's light, but it has a flavour. Nutty sort of wholemeal bready flavour, which is really good. Well, I like it anyway. There's just enough of that garlic butter flavour. This time it's not overpowering. And the toppings, mushrooms are so intense. I do like a lot of onions. Yeah, I'm really happy with that. So that, I suppose, is atomic shrimp style pizza in its current iteration. I probably will keep on developing this a little bit further, but I felt like it's got to the stage where I'm actually really quite happy with how it works, and so I thought it was worth showing at this stage. I'm not absolutely sure I want pepperoni on mine. It's nice, but I think there might be some other options to explore there. Anyway, do let me know what you might do differently, including slinging this thing across the room. I know a lot of people might have a problem with wholemeal crust and maybe my choice of cheese, but I think you need to discover what you like rather than just do what somebody else says is proper. But that's atomic shrimp style pizza in its current iteration. It's time for the comment positivity section. This is where I'm just going to pick out a handful of comments that either asked interesting questions or made interesting observations, or perhaps just made me smile. So starting with, just noticed your pocket knife has a pattern welded blade. It's a very pretty little feature. A couple of people commented on this knife actually. What brand of pocket knife is this in the video during the dodgy PSU section? I collect knives, where do you buy it? And who makes the Damascus lock knife you are using? So this is the knife. Here's the details on screen of where I bought this from. It's, you might be disappointed by this knife because for one thing, the apparently Damascus blade is not forge welded, folded steel or whatever. That pattern on there is etched. It's a stainless steel blade and it's just been etched with a decorative pattern that resembles Damascus for aesthetic reasons. I'm a tiny bit disappointed with this knife because I ordered it by mistake. I was trying to order a pocket knife that would be UK legal everyday carry compliant, and I ordered this one without actually noticing, not paying proper attention, without noticing that this is a lock knife. And knives with locking blades, you're allowed to own them and use them in the UK, but you can't just keep that in your pocket in case you need it because it's not everyday carry compliant. In order to be everyday compliant, a knife in the UK has to have a blade that's less than 3 inches long and it mustn't lock. So the knife I've got now is one I picked up in Spain, and that has a non-locking blade. That's about 2.5 inches long, which is plenty for what I need for cutting mushrooms generally, or perhaps whittling a twig. So that's my everyday carry knife at the moment. I don't know very much about this, but I'll put a picture on screen of what I think it might be. After I received this knife and realised I wouldn't be able to carry it, I ordered another one from the same site, which is Cyclair Knives, and I I didn't remedy my earlier problem of not paying attention because I still didn't pay attention, and I ordered another knife that looked like a lovely little pen knife that would, and it said it was UK compliant, and it looked like a great little pen knife with 4 blades, and this is it here. It's it's absurdly tiny. Let me get the biggest blade out. The blades are so tiny that actually you can't get hold of them without taking the other one out. There we go. That's the biggest blade. There's my thumb for comparison. I'll put that against the background so you can see it. Not very useful. It's a beautiful little thing and superbly engineered tiny miniature penknife, but it's more like a novelty than anything actually useful. So yeah, as I say, when I went to Spain after those 2 full starts, I happened to be in Spain, in an ironmonger's in Spain, and I found this knife, which is a really good knife. Really happy with this one, and this one served me very well. A couple of things about my tentative plan that I mentioned last time about possibly raising my greenhouse. A few people actually mentioned planning permission. Do I need planning permission to do it? I don't think I do. Greenhouses, as long as I don't exceed 2.5 meters tall at the gutter, or I think 4 meters tall or something like that at the apex of the roof, I'm not going to go anywhere near the height that I would need to go to before I started to need planning permission. Planning permission requirements are based on things like area of the footprint of the building, but also the height and the position and the visibility from the road and all sorts of things. I did check, but yeah, there's nothing to worry about with my greenhouse. If I just want to add an extra sort of 30 centimeters at the bottom, that won't cause any problems with the height or anything like that. But good to be aware of that. So a couple of other things about that. So regarding lifting the greenhouse, I'd question if it might be easier to dig down the soil a foot or two. You'd need to know how deep it is if it doesn't have some base and just go straight to soil. But lifting the structure, I reckon, would be a lot more tricky than moving soil. Actually, we'll come back to that comment because there's some stuff in there about tomatoes as well. A couple of other people said, have you thought about digging down the greenhouse? And I must admit I hadn't, but I think it would be a problem because the way that they sometimes dig a lined well is to put the liner on the top of to put a kind of perimeter on top of the soil and then dig down inside of that perimeter and then drop down that wall inside of the well. And I think that's potentially what would happen. If I was to try to dig down inside the greenhouse, I'd have to leave enough of a perimeter to support the existing greenhouse, which means I'd be digging down, I don't know, probably I'd have to go in about 30 centimeters in, and it's actually quite soft soil in there, so there's just a danger that I would dig down and the greenhouse would fall into the hole I was digging, unless I undermined in places and built supports. But then if I'm going to do that, it might just be easier to lift it, to take the greenhouse off, build a raised base and put the greenhouse back on top of it. The other thing, obviously, as mentioned here, is that if I dig down inside the greenhouse, the soil that I'm removing is topsoil, and we'd quickly get down to the underlying chalk, which is no good for planting into. So I would have to either then grow my plants in containers on top of that layer, losing some height, or I'd have to dig down even deeper, as this comment says, in order to put some topsoil back in. So I think digging out all that soil, and especially getting it through the narrow greenhouse door, would be probably less convenient than just deglazing the greenhouse, lifting off the frame, building a base and putting it all back. Next one, which is still on the same subject. Greenhouse lifting. My allotment neighbour has lifted her 6x8 greenhouse onto a raised bed and created a much admired all-weather growing space. She's also reused greenhouse frames, minus glass, to make walk-in grow houses by covering the frame with agri-mesh, securing with zip ties. Equals 0 cabbage munching wee beasties. Many thanks for your splendid work. Thank you for that. That's actually a really interesting idea, because on things like Facebook Marketplace and sometimes on eBay, you can actually get second-hand greenhouses really cheap, sometimes even free. Sometimes all people want to do is get rid of a greenhouse from their garden, and very often you'll find, especially on Facebook Marketplace, they'll say if you come and disassemble it yourself, you can have it for free. And often those greenhouses are frame only, because other people might have been there and had the glass, or the glass might have been broken and disposed of. And so greenhouse frames are often available for nothing. So yeah, there's a potential. I could get a greenhouse frame and make a fruit cage, or a pest-free growing, or at least a space that I can control the pests in. So interesting thoughts there. Coming back to that first comment, which went on to talk about tomatoes. As an amusing aside, something that just goes to show how wrong you can be when growing tomatoes, and they'll produce fruit regardless. I grew up not 5 minutes from the coast, near to a not very clean beach. There was a raw sewage drain, an overflow of some sort, I believe, but right by the opening, where the soil met the sand, there would be a tomato plant or two growing. That's actually apparently, I believe, quite common, where you get that in kind of sewage works and drain works and things, where water that's had tomato seeds washed down in it, the tomato seeds will just find a bit of soil and grow. If you recall, back when we were in the Lake District last year, I found a tomato plant growing in a gutter, and probably just somebody's tomato seed that had fallen out of a sandwich, and it had found a little crack in the gutter in between the stones, and it was growing and flowering and potentially fruiting, as long as the council didn't come along and scrape it off. But yeah, tomato plants, whilst there are a lot of people who have got theories on how to maximize cropping from tomato plants are very, very robust weeds. And so even if you do it wrong, you still get something. So now we're moving on to the thing about washing up basins and a washing up tub in the sink, which we talked about last time. Quite a lot of people commented on that. I'm getting too warm, I'm just going to take this off. So quite a few people commented on the washing up tub thing, the dishpan, and lots of interesting insights. So many comments, in fact, I can't possibly read them all here, but if you did post something, be assured I did read it, I did see it, and thank you very much for that. So just to talk through a few of those, another thing worth pointing out re washing dishes in a tub, a lot of older houses, especially Victorian ones, would have porcelain sinks in the kitchen. I think they're even less forgiving than the metal sinks found in most new fitted kitchens. I certainly wouldn't feel comfortable washing everything in the porcelain part of the sink, or I'd have nothing left. Imagine back in the day when people drank their tea in fine china, this was even more of a concern. Of course, back in those days, they wouldn't have had the plastic tubs, they'd have probably had an enamel tub. But even then, a kind of slightly flexible enamel tub, especially if it's got little feet on the bottom's just that little bit more springy and less solid than porcelain. Or they might have put a wooden board underneath to stop the basin from slipping around. So there would have been a tiny bit of cushioning there, perhaps a tiny bit more forgiving. It's interesting because I'd kind of assumed, I suppose, that these washing up basins probably went back to the introduction of plastic. But no, of course not. These are plastic replacements for what would have been an enamel tub or a galvanized tub that people put in the sink. And so yeah, in a butler sink, in one of these porcelain butler sinks, if you drop a glass in there, even if the sink's full of water, you've lost the glass. It's gone, because a delicate glass or cup hitting a solid stoneware sink is not going to come off well. And if you drop a larger item, of course, it might even chip the glaze on the sink, which is another undesirable outcome. Another one, I would use a bucket in the sink when I lived in a place that had a giant porcelain sink in the kitchen. It kept both my dishes in the sink safe from chips. I have in the past dropped bowls in the sink and chipped them. We also don't have waste disposal in UK sinks, so it's easier to separate solid waste in a removable bowl. So yeah, I suppose if you're, certain things towards the end of the washing up, if you end up with bits of stuff in the wash water, certainly that's, if you want to put that down on the garden or strain it out, then it's easier to do that from a bowl than it is with a sink. My sink's got an inbuilt strainer plug now, so if I'm washing anything that's going to leave bits and pieces in there, so like sometimes if I'm scrubbing vegetables in the sink, I will take the basin out and do that in the stainless steel sink, and any debris that comes off the vegetables, bits of torn off leaves and dirt and stones and whatever, I've got a strainer plug, and that strainer plug will catch all those bits. But that's a fairly modern thing, I think. So in days gone by, it might not have been desirable to have all of that debris going down the plug hole, because it might just cause a blockage. Carrying on again, many years ago I lived in an apartment in an old building in Chicago that still had its original kitchen sink. There was also an ice door in the outer wall, through which blocks of ice would have been delivered directly into the icebox. That's an interesting feature. That sink, cast iron with white porcelain, was huge but extremely shallow, and it had no way to close the drain. I bought a little rubber mat to cover the drain, but I found it difficult to wash dishes, as the water would start slopping over the side if the water got more than about 2 inches deep. Thanks to a home economics textbook from 1936, I eventually realised that the sink was intended to be used with a dishpan. I've always believed that the use of a dishpan would have been a carryover from pre-indoor plumbing days, when you drained your dishwater by carrying the dishpan to the back door and pouring it out on the ground. So there's another possibility, is maybe this goes back, all the way to when people didn't even have a sink in the kitchen. They just had maybe a table or something to work on. And so if you wanted to wash things, you carried in a bucket full of water, you poured it into a dishpan, you washed things in there, and when you were done, you carried the dishpan out the door and slung it on the ground. Very, very plausible. Indoor plumbing has not been around forever. Continuing, hello all, we have an extra tub in the sink here in Mexico in order to save as much water as possible. We use it in the garden and in the toilets. We wash all our dishes manually. So yeah, another one just to conserve water. So if water is scarce, or if actually water is just inconvenient to go and get. So if you have well water back in the day and you have to go and haul up another bucket of water out of the well, you might not be quite so inclined to waste that water as we are today when we can just turn on the tap. And so using that basin or dishpan or whatever enables you to wash your dishes, and then that water can be used to water plants or scrub the front path outside the front door or something. Different perspective here. This is really good, and actually there's something to say about this. I'm in the UK and we've never had a bowl in the sink. I suppose it just depends what's normal for you. And that's a really, really good point. So I was talking about this is normal here, but really the only bit of here that I can really guarantee is my household. So it's very, very, very easy to assume, isn't it, that what we were brought up to do as normal is normal in perhaps a broader geographic area. Often it is the case. Often something's normal in the whole of your region or perhaps the whole of your country. But how would you know? I've been to other people's houses and done washing up at their houses, and I think most of the time they did use a washing up bowl. But yeah, how would I know if somebody 100 miles from here, but still in England, washes up the same way that I do? How would I know that? Interesting perspective there. Yeah, it does depend on what's normal for you. And isn't it interesting how often we just assume, no, I'm the normal one, everyone else is the different one. So quite interesting to reflect on that. So thank you for making me think of that. Change the subject now. Does Eva have a favourite kind of rock? Well, most of the rocks that she's got to choose from here are flints, and so that will typically be the ones that she picks up. But she does have a favourite kind of shape and size of rock. When you see her barking at rocks and digging around them on the beach, I'm almost certain now that she's got this theory that when the rock is sitting on top of the sand, that she wants to dig away the sand from underneath the rock, leaving the rock hovering in midair so that she can pick it up without getting sand in her mouth. It's very logical. It's just that her science isn't quite right. Although I'm still convinced that maybe one day she'll pull it off. So Eva's criteria for rocks tends to be that she likes ones that are slightly oval, so she can carefully turn them up with her paws and pick them up without getting sand in her mouth. There is, though, also this thing where, with dogs, bigger is always better. And so if you offer a dog a big piece of food and a small piece of food, they'll nearly always go for the big one first. And it's the same thing with Eva, is like bigger rocks are better. And sometimes I have caught her trying to pick up rocks that are bigger than her head. And I have to stop her when she does that, because there is a risk of her damaging her teeth with these rocks. When you see her picking up pebbles on the beach, a lot of people have told me I shouldn't throw rocks for the dog because it's encouraging her to pick them up and she might damage her teeth. But it wasn't my idea, it was hers. So when you see me throwing rocks for Eva on the beach, that's not her playing my game, it's me playing her game. But also, when she picks up the normal sized pebbles, she is so incredibly gentle with them. And I'll see if I can get some close-up footage of that, maybe for a future video. But she picks them up and you can see her kind of cradling them in her jaws. They probably are in contact with her teeth, but she's carrying them ever so carefully. And she's nearly 10 years old now, and she's been doing this all her life, and she's still got all her teeth. So I think we're probably okay on the tooth risk thing. But yeah, on occasions, I have seen her trying to unearth and pick up a big flint nodule that was larger than her head, and just had to stop her, mainly because it's just like, what are you doing? What are you doing? And then finally, please show what you do with your veggie patches over winter. Just got an allotment, and it would be helpful to know what to do over winter. So we are going to look at a little bit of that now. Mostly what we've done is just to clear the plots and get some compost on now, so that that has a chance to be taken down into the soil and incorporated and properly broken down into the soil so that it's ready to provide nutrients and structure for the plant roots in spring. We'll also do some things like covering up the soil and just mulching just to keep the weeds down. But most of what we're doing now is clearing things away, making sure that everything's tidy, get some compost in or on the soil. And there are a few things that you can plant even at this time of year, broad beans being one of them. We planted broad beans in the autumn year before last, and that was last spring's crops. And the plants that came through the winter, they only grew about this tall in the autumn, and then they stood there all winter, and they got absolutely battered to shreds in the winter. And I thought we were going to lose them, but there must have been an established root system, and they sprouted again, and they were magnificent, and they cropped really well. So broad beans, we're doing that again this year. So you're going to see that in a minute, actually. We're just going to go out in the garden and just look at a few autumn garden tasks. So here's a very tiny disappointment. Do you remember those saffron crocuses I planted last random stuff video? Well, we went away for a couple of days and one of them has flowered and the flower has withered. And that there lying on the surface of the soil is the red string spice herb. But it's withered away and starting to rot. So I missed it. But there are lots of green shoots, which means the bulbs are alive. Maybe next year, eh? I mean, there might still be some more flowers to come. So we might catch another one of them in the next week or two. In the downstairs greenhouse, I think I'm probably going to have to start stripping away this Cape gooseberry now and taking this down. It's starting to look a little bit sad. My Lesia peppers are finally ripening. I'm going to try to overwinter that plant, and I will save seeds from this one that's fully ripe here. I don't think these have done as well as perhaps they might, but perhaps if I can overwinter the plants, give them a good start in the spring, we might get a better result next year. This year I'm not picking any green tomatoes. We made so much green tomato chutney last year that I don't need to make any this year. So what I've actually just done is stop watering the tomato plants, and I'm letting the fruit ripen if they will. I've just been up and picked these. Actually, some of these are a little bit overripe. I'm going to cook these. We also got these. Once they've started to turn colour, they will continue ripening in the house. So those we'll probably eat with salads. These, I'm going to just give them a little wash and then chop them up, and we'll stew them and make a tomato sauce which I'll freeze. And we can use that tomato sauce for pizza, pasta, whatever. So yeah, these, I'm not even going to peel them or anything like that. They'll just get diced, or quartered. And we'll stew those down to a sauce. It's going to be quite a yellow tomato sauce because we've got mostly yellow tomatoes here. The flavour's still very tomato forward, but often the sauce looks a bit weirdly pale as a result of that. Not a big deal. I mean, I did make those golden baked beans that time with yellow tomatoes as the sauce. But, you know, for something like pizza maybe, you might want a sauce that's got a little bit of red in it. So you can overcome that just by adding a bit of paprika. And I know what's up with that bit on there, but we'll get rid of that. And same deal there. Just any bits that look a bit iffy, because this is the tail end of the season. Anything that looks a bit iffy, we just chop it off. And it doesn't matter that the skins are going in these sauces, because actually the skins on these tomatoes are not bitter anyway. If you're making tomato soup, I suppose you might want to remove them. But also it depends on what you're going to be doing with the sauce. If it's going to go on a pizza or pasta with loads of other flavours, then any slight bitterness that you get from the skins is just added to the mix. And actually bitter as a flavour is quite a nice thing to have in a balanced flavour mix. You know, thinking about things like bitter flavours in beer or chocolate or anything else like that. It's just a flavour. Anyway, that lot can now just be stewed down. I might add a tiny bit of water to that, but it may not need it. So I'll just stew these until they are a kind of chunky pulp, and then I'll let that cool and freeze it. Not seasoning it, not adding herbs, not adding anything else at this point, because I want to keep my options open. So this will be frozen down as just tomato pulp. When it comes out, we'll decide what we're going to do with it. We will decide what herbs and seasonings and everything else might be appropriate at that point. But for the moment, it'll just get frozen down as cooked tomatoes. Much like if you get tomatoes in a can, they're just tomatoes. You've got your options open to add whatever you like. Just to very quickly note, this Parkside automatic watering system, which I bought at Lidl for £12 or £12.99 or something like that at the start of the year, has served me very well, and it was very reliable. It ran for the whole season on one set of batteries and still appears to have full power. That's the indicator there. I put this little flap of tape over there because somebody told me, a few people told me actually, that ultraviolet light from sunlight can damage LCD panels like this. So I just put that over there. And actually when I had it on the tap, I had a plastic milk bottle which I'd split and opened and put over the top of it just to stop driving rain getting into these little button bits or anything like that. I will probably take the batteries out of this for the winter, and I think probably I'll demote that set of batteries to the TV remote and put fresh ones in next year, even though it doesn't actually seem to have consumed very much of those batteries this season. I'll put fresh ones in at the start of next year, and then we'll be guaranteed to sort of get through the year without a power failure. And so yeah, it's been really good. All I've been using it for is to water 3 minutes every day, and it could have done a whole lot more than that, but that was sufficient to keep the tomatoes in vigorous growth and ensure a very decent crop. In fact, I think that might have been a little bit too much water, because the tomato plants did go a bit crazy and produce a lot of vegetative growth, and the fruits were perhaps not quite as sweet and tasty as they were the previous year when I watered mostly by hand. Anyway, yeah, automatic watering system, that's been absolutely great. No complaints. Here's something interesting that I found in our little patch of woodland. I was actually looking for something else in here actually, and came across this, but this is interesting and I felt like I wanted to share it with you. This is called the collared earth star or Geastrum triplex. It's a puffball kind of thing, but in addition to the spore bearing structure here, which if we give it a little poke we'll see puffs of spores come out, but in addition to this spherical spore bearing structure here, it's got these collars. It's got a star shaped collar around the outside and another one there. I don't think it's particularly rare or anything like that, but this is the first time I've seen this fungus. But yeah, if we give that a little poke, you can see spores puff out, and those spores hopefully will go off and reproduce this fungus. So nice to encounter this for the first time in my life, and right here in my own woods. Not edible, in case you were wondering. This is one of these fungi where it's classified as not edible, which is not the same thing as poisonous necessarily. It just means it's not worth eating. A little bit of preparation before the winter hits our vegetable patch. So this is where we had the courgettes. So the courgettes are going to be rotated into this plot next year. This one's going to be beans. So Jenny's busy planting the broad beans, which we'll plant for winter. They'll overwinter. We get a really good crop. That worked really well last year, so we're doing that again. This plot, which had beans last year, has got some garlic in it. We've been given some garlic bulbs, so those are planted there. They'd already started to sprout. And this middle plot, this is the one we had problems with the fertility. So this is the one that's going to have the courgettes. And obviously I will feed them, but I've got a cunning plan. Well, I'm going to try something anyway. So I dug a shallow trench and I'm going to put something in there. So over here in the upstairs woods, we've got a load of rotten logs, really rotten timber. This was left here by previous owners of the house. It was a big pile of firewood that was over here and it wasn't covered up and it was rotten by the time we moved in. I mean, this is actually falling apart to the point that you can just crumble it like that. So I'm going to pick some of the more rotten pieces here and I'm going to bury them in that vegetable patch. Wood itself is not particularly high nutrient for plants, but the things that live in wood are. So there's fungi. These are candle snuff fungus, I think. So the fungi that are breaking down the wood. There are various invertebrates that are eating the wood, and the things that those organisms excrete are good for plants. So that's the theory. Anyway, going to bury some of these logs in the middle of that patch, plus some other stuff. So yeah, it's just going to be some of these logs down the middle of the patch like that. Not a massive amount, but these are so rotten they are ready to return their nutrients into the soil. I've also got this. We went to the beach and gathered a couple of sacks of seaweed. This is already partly rotten because it's what had washed up on the shore. I'll just remove that bit of plastic. And yeah, so this is going to get spread out on top of those logs. Like that. And then there's one more thing, which is going to be the decomposed contents of my bin juice compost bin. So that's going to go on top as well. I'll pull that out and that will get buried in there as well. Alright, and then that soil, I'll draw it back over the top like that. Pack that down. And this should be a reservoir of nutrients that the courgette plants can put their roots down into. And because this is going in autumn, it's going to have a chance to break down even more in the soil here and integrate with the soil. Right, that's all done. So underneath here we've got decaying wood, decaying seaweed, well-rotted compost under this mound. And that's where I'm going to plant the courgettes. And I'm not going to overcrowd them this time. I planted way too many courgette plants last year and The yield was adequate, but it wasn't abundant, and I think that's just because I overcrowded them. So I think maybe a maximum of 4 plants next year. By the way, this green netting, in case you're wondering why we've got netting all around our vegetable patches, is to keep the neighbours' cats off them, and also Eva would go in there and dig holes and disrupt everything, so that's what that's for. Now the rhubarb, we didn't pick an awful lot of rhubarb this year, but that's good in a way, because it means that this plant should have a really well established and robust root system. So actually you can see that it's starting to produce some new growth there. We're going to force the rhubarb this year or next year. That involves putting an upturned bin over the top of it to exclude all of the light, and that will force the shoots, and they will grow spindly and pale, but also tender and sweet. That's the plan for the rhubarb. Now you may recall there were some raspberry plants that came up as volunteers in this rhubarb plot. Let's go and have a look and see what they're up to. So Jenny dug up all the raspberry plants, all the raspberries that came up in the rhubarb plot, and gave them a new home here in the woods. And here they are. They may look a bit straggly, but it's the end of the year. Actually, it looks like we've missed some raspberries. We have failed to crop some raspberries there, but never mind, maybe the birds had them. Our intention here is to let these raspberries grow wild into the woods. Raspberries are a native wild plant anyway, so they kind of belong here. And as a woodland species, raspberries are quite appropriate to have here. So we're going to start them here. Hopefully we'll pick 1 or 2 raspberries, but I'm not too worried. And we're just going to let them go. But yeah, it does look like we missed a few raspberries there. Never mind, live and learn. Now one thing you may have noticed where I talked about this fungus here, the collared earth star, you might have been looking at this. And perhaps you recognise these leaves as the leaves of the ginkgo tree. And we have got in our woods a very large ginkgo tree. It's actually the tallest tree we've got. It's taller than that big beech tree there. So there is something to look for underneath this tree. So this is not just a ginkgo tree, this is a female ginkgo tree. They have male and female on separate plants. And this is a female ginkgo tree, and it is producing fruits. So unfortunately though, they are going to be in the middle of this thicket. I can see one just down there. So there is the famous, or rather infamous, fruit of the ginkgo tree. And I'm going to pick that up. The seeds inside them, which are a bit like nuts, are edible. But I'm just going to put a glove on here because there's a couple of reasons to wear a glove. So reason the first is that the ginkgo fruits are stinky. They are renowned for being smelly. Actually, I've never really smelt one, so let's have a go at that now. Yeah, smells a bit like cheese. Strong cheese. I can't see any more fruits down here, but as you might have heard, there's cars whizzing past. This is right on the edge of the property, and I've seen them falling on the road and getting squished by cars. The seeds are edible. Some people call them ginkgo nuts. Apparently they're not actually a nut, although I checked that and they do seem to match the definition of a nut. That is a seed inside a hard shell that doesn't open. Anyway, so we've got a couple of them there. I'll keep rummaging around and we'll see what we can find. Anyway, I'm just going to turn the camera off now so I can use both hands for this rummage. Okay, well I succeeded in finding a few fruits, certainly enough to have a taste, and that's really all I want. So let's get these back indoors and prepare them. So I've got these ginkgo fruits. So what we've got to do here is just squeeze out the seeds into this water, and the fruit part we're going to discard. Now the other reason for wearing gloves here is that there is a potential for these fruits to be an irritant to skin. I wouldn't say that I have particularly sensitive skin, but I don't think there's any point taking any chances. Now, not all of these seeds are fully sized by the look of it. Some of them seem a little bit undersized. So it might be that we've only got a couple of useful seeds here. That's one of them. They've been likened to pistachio nuts because, well, they're similar sort of shape and size, but also when they're cooked, they pop open and they have a green nut inside them, or a green kernel inside them. Anyways, that's the ginkgo seed. That's the bit, well, the bit inside that is what we're going to be eating. I may actually find a few more of these seeds and stratify them and grow a few new ginkgo trees to give away to friends, because they are trees that people really like for their interesting foliage, which turns a lovely bright yellow colour in autumn. Anyway, let's clean these up and then see what we got. So after cleaning, sadly, it became clear that we've only really got 3 seeds here that are any good, that are worthwhile. Anyway, that's more than I need. So now I just need to boil some water. So these seeds contain, as well as containing an irritant chemical in the fruit part, which we've discarded, the seed kernels contain a couple of different things which are problematic. One is cyanogenic glycosides, same sorts of things you get in apricot seeds and bitter almonds and so on, that will turn to cyanide in your stomach. So that needs to be destroyed by heating. But also they contain something that stops your body absorbing vitamin B6. That can cause neurological damage. It's only a risk if you eat a lot of these, but there doesn't seem to be any firm figure on what a lot means. So I'm only going to eat a couple of these. So I've got a pan of water just coming to a boil here. And I'm going to drop these nuts or seeds into the pan. And we're going to boil them for 5 minutes. Now, in case you're thinking, hey, that's the wrong way to do it, I did research this. There's about 1 million different ways to prepare these nuts, and everybody seems to have their own methods. So I'm just following one of those methods that I found. If you think that it should be done differently, you're probably right, because everyone does it differently. It does seem like a terrible waste to be boiling even this small pan of water for just 3 nuts, but that's what I've got. I don't really want to eat a ton of these things, because I think with any kind of potentially dodgy new food, it's best to start with just a little bit. While those are cooking, let's just revisit the smell of these fruits. I thought maybe my sense of smell wasn't functioning, because whilst there is a strong smell here, it doesn't smell particularly unpleasant to me. It is strong. It is kind of cheesy, but I like some really strong and pungent cheeses. So perhaps this is just, it just happens to be that this smell is just somewhere in the range of normal cheesiness type of smells for me. I can understand how people might find that smell unpleasant, because it is quite pungent and it is kind of cheesy, a bit like, well, not to put too fine a point on it, it is a little bit like the smell of vomit. But you know, if you smell Stilton cheese, that doesn't smell necessarily what you would describe as pleasant, first off. Anyway, yeah, so they do smell strong. I'm not going to say that they smell unpleasant. They're just very distinctive and strong. All right, so that's time up on the boiling now. So now we drain them. And those are the cooked seeds now. They're lightly cooked, but yeah, these don't smell anymore. So the next bit is to get the cast iron skillet nice and hot. A little way to go still. And then we're going to toast these nuts in there. This would have been a job for those tiny skillets I used to have, but we did dispose of them after the kitchen refit, because we just decided that we needed the room for something else, for other things. Right, that is now starting to smoke. So that means, and you meant to do this with a whole pan full. Obviously, I don't have a whole pan full, but we'll just keep them on the move. And in theory, they should pop. Okay, well, those have not popped open, but I feel like those must be sufficiently cooked now. They're starting to get a little bit of a toasted patch on the top there. They've been in there for about 10 minutes. I feel like those must be kind of sufficiently done now. Okay, freshly toasted hot ginkgo nut. I need to crack these open. So, crack that open with the vice grips. Nope, that was not as difficult as I thought. And there we go. So the seed inside is this weird gummy thing that looks like a pistachio, but it's a lot more squishy. It just smells nutty and starchy. So tasting time, here we go. Flavor's a bit like sweet chestnut. Texture is a bit like cooked pasta, but there is none of the stinkiness to these. So they are just, at this point, I think I might have over toasted that one a little bit. So they are just strange nuts. Taste very reminiscent of sweet chestnut, so slightly sweet, starchy, potatoey sort of flavour. Texture is kind of gummy. Yeah, really rather strange. I will save this one and see if Jenny wants it. So there we go. That was tasting Ginkgo nuts. That was just to satisfy my curiosity, and that's done now. So yeah, I wouldn't say they're anything to write home about, but I can see why people like them. This is some of the leftover wild rice and almond pudding from the Gaylord Hauser cookbook review video. It is the morning after making this pudding, and it's now set quite firm. So now I'm wondering what happens if we slice this and fry it. And as I've often said, the solution to wondering is to stop wondering and find out. I have a feeling this is going to break up, actually, because it didn't even slice very cleanly. And I'm using the non-stick pan rather than the Visions ceramic one because I just think it might stick and break up further on that one. Anyway, we're going to give this a little sizzle and see what happens. I should also try a piece actually chilled and see what that's like. Not quite so nice chilled. It's mostly rice, and you can tell you're eating cold rice. Might be quite nice broken up and crumbled into a salad or something. Anyway, we are here to see what happens when we try to fry it. So far, so good. Well, so far it's holding together. I had to go and say it, didn't I? I was going to say, so far it's holding together better than I thought. And then it stops holding together. It is crisping up. But it is also falling apart. Which should surprise no one, really. There's no egg or anything in there to bind it. It's just the starch. Right, okay, let's get that on the plate and see what it tastes like now. Similar to what it was like when it first came out, actually, so reheating it does seem to work. Do you know what I'm curious about? I did say this has got a kind of sausagey vibe to it in some way. So what's it like with some brown sauce? This brown sauce, by the way, Stokes, call me a heretic, but I think I like this more than I like HP. Certainly, I like it more than I like what HP has become. I bought a bottle of HP sauce quite recently, and it just seems like they might have changed the recipe. Had the impression I was consuming thickened water. That's actually really good. That is a good combo. Basically, when it's presented like this, what we've got here is a bit like black pudding without the blood. That is really good with brown sauce, which I think is reasonably consistent with what Hauser said about serving it with a lemon sauce or a tart apple sauce. So the sour tasting sauce goes well with this. Now, I don't think I would go as far as to incorporate the brown sauce into the recipe. I think it works better when it's added on and there's a kind of contrast and a bit of heterogeneity. That was good. So there is one other autumn garden thing to do that I've really only just thought to mention, which is reflect. So this is the perfect time of year to sit down, think about what went wrong and also what went right, and make some notes. And so I just noted that this year I had 2 goes at planting Swiss chard, and it got eaten when I planted it directly in the soil. So when I started my chard in modules, it was very successful. So I should just make a note to start that way next year. training the tomatoes as a curtain. So they grew up to the roof level in the greenhouse, flopped over a horizontal cane, and then trailed back down as a curtain. Very successful way of training tomatoes. I'm going to do that again next year. Planting broad beans in autumn, well, we've already done that actually, but that's definitely a winner. Things that went perhaps not so well this year. My courgettes, I overcrowded them. Just not going to do that next year. The shallots and fennel that I grew were just weak and didn't really crop. So I don't know whether I will decide just not to grow those things next year, or whether I'll just do a bit of reading up over the winter, see if I can figure out what I might have done wrong. Companion planting in the greenhouse was a bit futile, really, so planting those marigolds in the greenhouse border amongst the tomatoes just overcrowded and competed for light and nutrients on that side of the greenhouse. I don't think I should bother with that again. And then the other thing to do is just to make some notes about when things have to happen. So that might be that you put dates in a diary or in a calendar, or just appointment things in your smartphone calendar, for example, just to say plant X now. So over the winter, I'm going to have a look at my seed packets and see what seeds I need to buy, and I'm going to try and plant them on schedule this coming year. I don't always do that. I'm sometimes a bit late on planting. So I'm going to try and make the effort to plant on schedule so that we get a good start, so that we're not waiting for things to start. Certainly with things like tomato plants, I could have started earlier indoors than I did this year. So anyway, that's the end of this random stuff video. I hope that's been interesting. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.